Part 3. The Composition. Harrison gradually earns Fiona's trust by sharing his own story of loss. He discovers Julian left behind an unfinished symphony that Fiona hasn't been able to complete or perform since his passing. Part 4. Broken Harmonies. A setback occurs when Fiona attempts to play Julian's unfinished piece publicly but freezes on stage. Her relationship with Harrison becomes strained as she retreats back into her shell. Part 5. The Final Movement. Fiona finds her own voice by finishing Julian's symphony in her own way. With subtle encouragement from Harrison, she performs it brilliantly, finally playing with genuine emotion while still honoring her past love. Part 1. The Silent Pianist. The Rosemont Grand Hotel lobby was all polished marble and crystal chandeliers, but it was the piano music that made it truly exceptional. Technically flawless notes flowed through the space, yet something crucial was missing, something the casual listener might never notice, but that Harrison Brooks recognized immediately. The pianist's fingers moved with mechanical precision across the keys. She was a woman perhaps in her mid-30s with auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun, her posture perfect as she played a Chopin nocturne. Her technique was impeccable, but the music lacked soul. It was as if she deliberately held back the very thing that made music worth listening to. Harrison sipped his whiskey, watching her from the corner of the bar. After 20 years as a music producer, he had an ear for authenticity. This woman played like someone performing surgery, skilled but detached. "She's been here for 3 years now," the bartender commented, noticing Harrison's interest. "Fiona Wright. Graduated from Juilliard, could have played anywhere in the world." "What brought her here?" Harrison asked, still watching the pianist. The bartender shrugged. "No one really knows. She keeps to herself, never socializes with the staff, never accepts requests. Management lets her do as she pleases because guests love the ambiance. Even if she is," he trailed off, "even if she's what?" Harrison pressed. "Well, sad, I guess. I've never seen her smile." "Not once in 3 years," Harrison nodded thoughtfully. He was in town for a music conference, staying at the Rosemont for 2 weeks. Something about Fiona Wright's empty performance intrigued him. It wasn't that she couldn't play with feeling. He sensed she was deliberately suppressing it. For the next 3 evenings, Harrison returned to the lounge, each time taking a seat closer to the piano. He noticed small details. How Fiona's hand occasionally drifted to her jacket pocket between pieces. The slight tremor in her left hand when she played certain minor chords. The way she closed her eyes during passages that should have been the most emotionally evocative. On the 4th night, as the lounge emptied and Fiona began her final set, Harrison approached the piano. Hotel policy prohibited interrupting the pianist, but it was nearly midnight, and they were alone except for the night manager. "Excuse me," he said softly when she finished a piece. Fiona looked up, startled. Her eyes were a deep green, but vacant somehow, as if she'd retreated far inside herself. "I don't take requests," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I wasn't going to ask for one," Harrison replied. "I just wanted to tell you that your technique is remarkable." Something flickered across her face, annoyance perhaps. "Thank you," she said flatly, turning back to the keys. "But you're not really playing, are you?" He added, her hands froze above the keyboard. "I beg your pardon?" "The notes are perfect, but there's nothing behind them." "You're going through the motions." Fiona's expression hardened. "I play what the hotel requires. If you're dissatisfied, you can speak to management." "I'm Harrison Brooks," he said, ignoring her dismissal. "I produce music for a living. I know the difference between performance and passion." "How fortunate for you," she replied coldly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have 3 more pieces to complete before my shift ends." As she began playing again, her back even straighter than before, Harrison noticed her left hand slip briefly into her jacket pocket, clutching something there before returning to the keys. The gesture seemed almost unconscious. He returned to his seat, watching as she continued through her set. When she finished, she closed the piano lid gently, gathered her sheet music, and walked toward the staff exit without acknowledging anyone. Just before she disappeared through the door, Harrison noticed something gleaming on a thin chain around her neck, briefly visible as she turned. Something metallic that caught the light before she tucked it back beneath her collar with practiced ease. As the door swung closed behind her, the night manager approached with an apologetic smile. Mr. Brooks, I'm sorry if Miss Wright was short with you. She's an intensely private person. No need to apologize, Harrison replied. Tell me, does she ever play her own compositions? The manager looked surprised. Not that I'm aware of. Is there a reason you ask? Harrison shook his head. Just curious. There's something familiar about her style, but I can't quite place it. That night, Harrison couldn't sleep. He kept hearing Fiona's perfect, soulless rendition of Chopin in his mind. There was a mystery there, a story behind those empty notes and vacant eyes, and despite himself, he wanted to understand it. Echoes of yesterday. The grand piano stood silent in the morning light, its polished surface reflecting the chandelier's crystal teardrops. Harrison arrived at the lounge earlier than usual, hoping to catch Fiona before her evening performance began. Instead, he found the hotel's day manager arranging fresh flowers. Looking for our resident pianist? The woman asked, noticing Harrison's gaze lingering on the piano. Yes, actually. Does she ever come in during the day? The manager smiled knowingly. Fiona practices in the East Wing ballroom every afternoon from 2 to 4. It's closed for renovations, but she has special permission. She paused, studying Harrison. You're not the first guest to become intrigued by her, you know. Something about tragic beauty always draws people in. Tragic? Harrison echoed. Oh, I shouldn't gossip, the manager said, though her expression suggested otherwise. But if you happen to find yourself near the East Ballroom around 2, well, she smiled and returned to her flowers. Harrison spent the morning at his conference, but his mind kept drifting back to the pianist with the empty music. At 2:15, he found himself walking down the corridor toward the East Wing, following the faint sound of a piano. Unlike her evening performances, these notes carried emotion, raw, unfiltered grief that made Harrison stop in his tracks. Through the partially open door, he could see Fiona playing something he didn't recognize. Her eyes were closed, tears streaming down her face as her fingers coaxed heartbreaking melodies from the keys. Harrison stood transfixed, afraid to breathe lest he interrupt this moment of genuine feeling. But as the piece reached its crescendo, Fiona suddenly stopped, her hands trembling above the keyboard. She reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew what Harrison now saw was an antique pocket watch on a long chain. She held it tightly, pressing it to her lips. Julian, she whispered, her voice breaking on the name. Feeling like an intruder, Harrison stepped back, but the old floorboard beneath him creaked. Fiona's head snapped up, her vulnerability instantly replaced by a cold mask. What are you doing here? She demanded, quickly tucking the watch back into her pocket. I'm sorry, Harrison said, stepping into the room. I heard the music. It was beautiful. Fiona stood abruptly, gathering her sheet music. This area is off limits to guests. That piece, Harrison persisted. I've never heard it before. Is it yours? Her hands stilled. No, she said softly. It's not mine. Julian's? Harrison ventured. The sheet music scattered across the floor as Fiona's hands lost their grip. How do you know that name? She asked, her voice barely audible. You just said it, Harrison replied gently, while holding the watch. Fiona stared at him for a long moment, then slowly bent to collect her music. Harrison knelt to help her, picking up a page with handwritten notation. At the top, in elegant script, was written, For my beloved Fiona J.M. Julian Mercer, Harrison breathed, recognition dawning. You were engaged to Julian Mercer. 5 years ago, the classical music world had mourned the loss of one of its most promising young composers. Julian Mercer had died suddenly at 33, just weeks before his wedding and the premiere of what critics anticipated would be his masterpiece. Fiona took the page from Harrison's hands, her fingers trembling. Please leave. I was at his last performance in Vienna, Harrison said instead. His piano concerto was revolutionary. I always wondered what happened to his final symphony, the one they said he was working on when he died. It was never finished, Fiona said, her professional mask cracking. And it never will be. Harrison noticed how she instinctively touched her pocket where the watch lay hidden. The watch was his? Fiona looked down, silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, softer, filled with pain she no longer tried to hide. It was his grandfather's, then his. He carried it everywhere, said it kept perfect time like music should. He was holding it when he... She stopped herself. When he died, Harrison finished gently. Heart condition, she said mechanically, as if she'd rehearsed the words, undiagnosed. He collapsed during rehearsal, and you were there. Fiona nodded, tears threatening again. I played with him. We were duet partners before we were anything else. She looked up suddenly, her eyes fierce. Why am I telling you this? Sometimes strangers are safer than friends, Harrison said. No history, no expectations. Well, now you know, she said, regaining her composure. The sad story of Fiona Wright, the pianist who lost her music when Julian Mercer died. Is your curiosity satisfied? Not quite, Harrison said, watching her carefully. Why do you still play if it hurts so much? Because it's all I have left of him, she answered, her voice breaking. And because I promised. She closed the lid of the piano gently, running her fingers along the polished wood. I promised I'd finish his symphony someday. But I can't feel the notes the way he did. Harrison stayed silent, sensing there was more. In the evenings, I play like a machine because it's safer that way, Fiona continued, almost to herself. But here, alone, I try to find his voice again in the music. I've been trying for 5 years. She looked up, meeting Harrison's eyes directly. I keep his watch close because he always said music and time were the same thing, both measuring the moments of our lives. Would you show me his symphony? Harrison asked quietly. The unfinished one? Fiona stared at him for a long moment, then shook her head. No one has seen it since he died. Not even his publisher. I understand, Harrison nodded, turning to leave. At the door, he paused. When I produce music, I look for authenticity above all else. Technical perfection means nothing without soul. What I heard you playing just now, that had soul, Fiona. That was Julian's soul, not mine, she whispered. I lost mine when he died. As Harrison walked away, he heard the piano begin again, the same haunting melody, but this time played with a hesitation that hadn't been there before. The notes followed him down the corridor, each one carrying a question that neither of them had dared to ask aloud. The composition rain pelted against the windows of the Rosemont Grand, turning the city into a gray watercolor painting. The lounge was unusually crowded with hotel guests seeking refuge from the downpour. Harrison sat at his usual table near the piano, watching Fiona play her evening set with the same technical precision and emotional detachment she always displayed in public. 3 days had passed since their encounter in the East Ballroom. Each afternoon, Harrison had deliberately stayed away, giving her the privacy she clearly valued during her practice sessions. But each evening, he returned to the lounge, and each time he noticed Fiona's eyes briefly finding his before quickly looking away. Tonight, something was different. Beneath her composed exterior, Fiona seemed distracted. Twice she hesitated between pieces, her hand drifting to her pocket where Julian's watch lay hidden. Once she even made a small mistake, nothing the average listener would catch. But Harrison noticed her slight flinch. When her shift ended, instead of leaving immediately as she usually did, Fiona lingered at the piano, her fingers resting on the closed lid. Harrison waited, sensing she had something to say. Finally, she approached his table. May I join you? She asked quietly. Harrison nodded, surprised. A waiter immediately appeared, and Fiona ordered tea. You haven't come to the ballroom, she said once they were alone. I thought you wanted your privacy. She nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm teacup. I do, she paused. But I've been thinking about what you said about authenticity in music. Harrison remained silent, giving her space to continue. You mentioned you were a producer, she said. What kind of music do you work with? All kinds, he replied. Classical, jazz, even some experimental compositions. I specialize in finding unique voices and helping them be heard. Fiona took a deep breath. Julian's symphony, his final piece, it wasn't just unfinished. It was, she struggled for the word, different, experimental. Even I didn't fully understand where he was going with it. Harrison leaned forward slightly. Different how? He was blending classical structure with modern elements. He called it temporal resonance, a piece about how the past echoes into the future. Her voice grew softer. It was meant to be our wedding gift to each other. We were going to premiere it together. And you've never shared it with anyone? Fiona shook her head. I couldn't bear to. His publisher asked, of course. Other composers offered to complete it, but it felt too personal too. She trailed off. Too much like letting go. Harrison finished for her. She looked at him with surprise. Yes, exactly. They sat in silence for a moment, the rain creating a gentle backdrop to their conversation. "I have the manuscript in my apartment," Fiona said suddenly. "The complete first movement, parts of the second and third, and just fragments of the fourth. His notes are all over it, little reminders, questions, ideas." Harrison waited, sensing there was more. "Would you—" She hesitated. "Would you look at it with me? As a professional, I mean. Not to finish it, just to understand it better." "I would be honored," Harrison said sincerely. "Tomorrow afternoon, then. I don't practice on Thursdays." Fiona's apartment was exactly what Harrison had expected. Minimalist, orderly, with a baby grand piano occupying most of the living room space. What surprised him were the photographs. Dozens of them covered one wall, all of Fiona and a dark-haired man with intense eyes and an infectious smile. Julian. "These are from our tour of Europe," Fiona explained, following Harrison's gaze. "6 months before he died." "You look happy," Harrison observed, noting the carefree smile on Fiona's face in the photos, a smile he had yet to see in person. "I was," she said simply, then moved to a cabinet and withdrew a leather portfolio. "This is it. Julian's last work." They sat at her dining table as she carefully opened the portfolio. Inside were pages of sheet music, some neatly written, others filled with crossed-out notes and marginal scribbles. Harrison recognized the handwriting from the sheet he'd seen in the ballroom. "He always composed by hand," Fiona explained. "Said computers made music too perfect, too easy to change. He believed in committing to each note." Harrison examined the pages carefully. The composition was unlike anything he'd seen before. Complex, innovative, yet with a classical foundation that anchored the experimental elements. "This is remarkable," he said honestly. "The structure is revolutionary, but there's something timeless about it too." "That was Julian," Fiona said softly, "always bridging worlds." As they pored over the manuscript, Fiona began explaining Julian's notations, her initial reserve gradually melting away. Her voice grew animated as she pointed out particularly inventive passages, occasionally humming phrases to illustrate a point. "This section here," she said, pointing to a complex sequence in the second movement, "he was stuck on this for weeks. He kept saying it needed something, but he couldn't figure out what." Harrison studied the passage. "Have you tried playing it?" "Parts of it," Fiona admitted, "but never the whole thing. I can play the notes, but I can't feel what he was trying to say." "Would you play some of it now?" Harrison asked gently. Fiona hesitated, then nodded. She moved to the piano and positioned the manuscript on the stand. Harrison watched as she took a deep breath, removed Julian's watch from her pocket, and placed it on top of the piano where she could see it. The music that emerged was unlike anything Harrison had heard before. Hauntingly beautiful, challenging, full of unexpected harmonies that somehow resolved perfectly. But as Fiona reached the incomplete section of the second movement, her playing became uncertain, halting. "This is where I always stop," she said, her fingers hovering over the keys. "Everything after this feels like I'm just guessing." Harrison moved to stand beside the piano. "What if you weren't trying to guess what Julian would write? What if you just played what you feel?" Fiona looked up at him, startled. "But it's his composition." "Music isn't just about the composer, Fiona. It's about the performer, too. Your interpretation matters." "I wouldn't know where to begin," she whispered. Harrison considered for a moment. "Tell me about Julian." "Not the composer, the man." A small smile touched Fiona's lips, the first real smile Harrison had seen from her. "He was brilliant, of course, but also funny, surprisingly silly sometimes. He could be intensely focused 1 minute and childishly playful the next." Her eyes grew distant with memory. "He loved thunderstorms and hated olives. He collected vintage maps and insisted on getting lost in every new city we visited." As she spoke, Harrison quietly moved to the piano bench beside her. "Play that," he said softly. "Play the man you loved, not the notes he wrote." Fiona stared at him, then slowly turned back to the keys. She began again, but this time when she reached the unfinished section, she didn't stop. Instead, her fingers found new patterns, new harmonies that weren't on the page but somehow felt right, felt true to the foundation Julian had built. When she finally stopped playing, tears were streaming down her face. "That wasn't Julian's music," she said, her voice breaking. "No," Harrison agreed. "It was yours, but it honored his." Fiona touched the pocket watch gently. I've been so afraid of changing anything, of losing the last piece of him I had left. Perhaps finishing his symphony doesn't mean losing him, Harrison suggested. Maybe it means finding a way to keep his music alive through your own voice. Fiona looked at him for a long moment. Why are you helping me with this? Harrison considered his answer carefully. Because true art deserves to be completed, and because no one should play without feeling. As he left her apartment that evening, Harrison realized something had shifted between them. The wall Fiona had built around herself had begun to crack, revealing glimpses of the woman she had been before grief had hollowed out her music. What he didn't tell her was that he had recognized something in her playing, something rare and genuine that the world deserved to hear. And perhaps in helping her find her voice again, he might find something he hadn't realized he was looking for. Broken Harmonies. The announcement appeared in the hotel's weekly newsletter. Special performance: Fiona Wright presents Temporal Resonance, an unfinished symphony by Julian Mercer. Saturday, 8 p.m., Grand Ballroom. Harrison stared at the simple text, a mixture of surprise and pride washing over him. In the 2 weeks since they'd examined Julian's manuscript together, Fiona had thrown herself into the composition with renewed purpose. Their afternoon sessions had become a routine. Harrison would listen as she played through sections, offering suggestions not as a composer, but as someone who understood the delicate balance between honoring Julian's vision and finding her own voice within it. He hadn't expected her to announce a public performance so soon. When he found her in the East Ballroom that afternoon, she was practicing with an intensity he hadn't witnessed before. "I saw the announcement," he said when she paused. "Are you sure you're ready?" Fiona's hand stilled on the keys. "No," she admitted, "but I'll never be completely ready. It's time to try. What changed your mind?" She reached for Julian's watch, which now sat openly on the piano rather than hidden in her pocket. "Something you said about music needing both the composer and the performer. I've been keeping Julian's work locked away as if protecting it, but really, I've been silencing it." She looked up at Harrison. "Music is meant to be heard." Harrison nodded, understanding. "Have you completed the fourth movement?" "Not exactly," Fiona said. "I've found my way through most of it, but the ending..." She shook her head. "Julian left very few notes for the finale. I keep feeling like I'm missing something essential." "Maybe by the time you get there in performance, it will come to you," Harrison suggested. Fiona smiled tentatively. "That's what I'm hoping." Throughout the week, Fiona continued her regular evening performances in the lounge, but something had changed. Though she still played the standard repertoire the hotel expected, subtle differences emerged in her interpretation. A slight rubato here, a more expressive phrasing there. Most guests wouldn't notice, but Harrison did. It was as if she was gradually allowing herself to feel again. By Saturday evening, the Grand Ballroom was filled with an eclectic mix of hotel guests, local music enthusiasts who had seen the advertisement, and even a few critics from the city's arts publications. Harrison recognized the hotel manager speaking with a distinguished older man he later learned was the director of the city symphony. Backstage, Fiona was surprisingly calm as she arranged her music on a stand beside the concert grand piano. "Nervous?" Harrison asked, approaching her. "Terrified," she admitted with a small smile, "but also ready, I think." Harrison noticed she was wearing a simple black dress with a single piece of jewelry, a thin silver chain holding Julian's pocket watch, now displayed openly rather than hidden. "Julian would be proud," Harrison said softly. Fiona's eyes met his, filled with a complex mix of emotions. "Thank you. Not just for saying that, but for..." She gestured vaguely. "Everything these past weeks." Before Harrison could respond, the stage manager appeared. "5 minutes, Ms. Wright." Harrison squeezed her hand gently. "I'll be in the front row. Just play from your heart." Taking his seat, Harrison felt a strange nervousness on Fiona's behalf. He had heard her play portions of the symphony dozens of times over the past 2 weeks, had watched her reconnect with the music and with her own talent. But tonight was different. Tonight she would share Julian's final work and her own contribution to it, with the world. The lights dimmed, and Fiona walked onto the stage to polite applause. She sat at the piano, adjusted her bench, and took a deep breath. Her fingers touched the keys, and the first movement began. The audience fell utterly silent as the haunting opening theme filled the ballroom. Harrison watched as Fiona's rigid posture gradually softened, her body beginning to move with the music rather than remaining stoically separate from it. The first movement flowed perfectly into the second, where Fiona had made her first significant contributions to Julian's framework. It was during the third movement that Harrison first noticed something was wrong. Fiona hesitated slightly at a transition, her rhythm faltering. She recovered quickly, but her shoulders had tensed. As the movement progressed toward its climactic section, a passage they had worked on extensively, her playing became increasingly mechanical, reminiscent of how she had performed when Harrison first heard her in the lounge. Then, as she reached the bridge to the fourth movement, Fiona stopped completely. Her hands froze above the keys, her eyes fixed on the manuscript. The silence stretched for 10 seconds, then 20. A murmur ran through the audience. Harrison leaned forward in his seat, willing her to continue. He saw her reach for Julian's watch, clutching it tightly, her knuckles white with tension. "I can't," she whispered, though in the perfect acoustics of the hall, many heard her. She stood abruptly, gathering her music with trembling hands, and fled the stage. Harrison was out of his seat instantly, ignoring the confused murmurs that erupted behind him. He found Fiona in a small anteroom off the backstage area, her back pressed against the wall, breathing heavily. "Fiona, I couldn't do it," she interrupted, her voice breaking. "I heard his voice in my head telling me I was changing too much, that it wasn't his music anymore." She looked up at Harrison, her eyes filled with anguish. And he was right. "The fourth movement, it's almost entirely mine now. I've taken his symphony and made it something else." "That's not true," Harrison said firmly. "You've honored his foundation while bringing your own interpretation to it." "No." Fiona shook her head violently. "I've betrayed his vision. I thought I was ready to let him go, to let the music evolve, but I'm not." She clutched Julian's watch. This was a mistake. Harrison stepped closer. "Fiona, what happened out there wasn't about the music. It was about grief." "What do you know about grief?" she snapped, anger flashing through her tears. "More than you might think," Harrison said quietly. "I lost my sister 8 years ago. She was a violinist. We used to compose together when we were young." He paused. "After she died, I couldn't listen to violin music for 2 years. Every note felt like a reminder of what was gone." Fiona's expression softened slightly. "You never told me that." "Because this wasn't about me," Harrison replied. "But I do understand something about how music and loss can become entangled." The door opened and the stage manager peered in. "Ms. Wright? The audience is waiting. Should we make an announcement?" "Tell them I apologize, but the performance cannot continue tonight," Fiona said, her professional mask slipping back into place. After the manager left, an uncomfortable silence fell between them. "I should go apologize personally," Fiona said finally, moving toward the door. "What will you do now?" Harrison asked. She paused, her hand on the doorknob. "I don't know, but I think I need some time alone to figure it out." "Of course," Harrison nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. "Take all the time you need." Over the next 3 days, Fiona didn't appear for her regular performances in the lounge. The hotel manager informed Harrison that she had requested personal leave. His attempts to call her went unanswered. On the 4th day, Harrison found a note slipped under his hotel room door. "I'm sorry for disappearing. I needed to think. If you're willing, meet me at the cafe across from the city concert hall tomorrow at 2 p.m. Fiona." The next afternoon, Harrison arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early, unsure what to expect. When Fiona entered, he was struck by how different she looked. Her hair loose around her shoulders, wearing casual clothes instead of her usual formal attire. Julian's watch was still around her neck, but something about her seemed lighter, less burdened. "Thank you for coming," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "I was worried about you," Harrison admitted. Fiona nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "After what happened at the performance, I went back to Julian's old apartment. His family kept it. I have a key, but I hadn't been there in years." She took a deep breath. "I was looking for something, anything that might help me understand what he would have wanted for the symphony." "And did you find it?" A small smile touched her lips. "Not exactly. But I found something else. His journals from when he was composing Temporal Resonance." She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn leather notebook. He wrote about his intentions for the piece, his doubts, his excitement. And I found this. She opened the journal to a marked page and pushed it across the table. Harrison read the passage she indicated. She opened the journal to a marked page and pushed it across the table. Harrison read the passage she indicated. Music exists in conversation with the future. Every composer knows their work will outlive them, will be interpreted and reinterpreted by others. That's not a corruption of the original. It's the fulfillment of it. What excites me most about temporal resonance is imagining how Fiona might transform it over the years. How our musical conversation might continue even when I'm no longer part of it. Harrison looked up, seeing tears in Fiona's eyes, but they weren't tears of grief. He expected me to change it, she said softly. He wanted me to make it my own. What will you do now? Harrison asked. Fiona took back the journal, closing it carefully. I'm going to finish the symphony, truly finish it in my own voice. And then I'm going to play it not just for Julian's memory, but for myself. She paused. The City Symphony has offered me a special performance date next month. That's wonderful, Harrison said sincerely. There's something else, Fiona continued, her eyes meeting his directly. My contract with the hotel ends in 3 weeks. I've been offered a position at the conservatory in Boston. Boston, Harrison repeated, feeling a surprising pang of disappointment. That's a great opportunity. It is, Fiona agreed. But before I decide, I need to finish what I started here. She hesitated. And I was hoping you might still be willing to help me with the fourth movement. If you can extend your stay, that is. Harrison smiled. As it happens, I have some flexibility in my schedule. As they left the cafe together, walking toward the concert hall where Fiona had arranged practice time, Harrison realized that something fundamental had shifted between them. The wall of grief that had separated Fiona from the world was beginning to crumble, revealing glimpses of the passionate musician she had once been, and might become again. What remained to be seen was whether the music that had brought them together would ultimately lead them in different directions, or whether, like Julian's symphony, their story was still waiting for its final movement. The final movement. The concert hall was silent, holding its breath. 300 pairs of eyes focused on the solitary figure seated at the grand piano on stage. The program in each audience member's hand read simply, Temporal Resonance, a Symphony for Piano by Julian Mercer, completed by Fiona Wright. In the front row, Harrison sat perfectly still, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. It had been 6 weeks since Fiona's aborted performance at the hotel. 6 weeks of intense collaboration as they worked together to truly complete Julian's symphony. Now on this autumn evening, the City Symphony had given Fiona their stage for this special performance. Backstage, just before she'd walked out, Harrison had handed her a small box. What's this? She'd asked, surprised. Something to go with Julian's watch, he'd said. Open it after. Now, as the house lights dimmed, Fiona looked out at the audience for just a moment, her eyes finding Harrison's before she turned her attention to the keyboard. Julian's pocket watch lay open beside her sheet music, the soft ticking a metronome to ground her. She began. The first 3 movements flowed with a confidence that had been absent in her previous attempt. Where before she had seemed torn between precision and emotion, now she had found the balance, honoring Julian's meticulous structure while infusing it with her own expressive interpretation. Harrison watched, captivated by the transformation. This was not the same woman who had played mechanically in the hotel lounge when he first arrived, nor was it the grief-stricken pianist who had fled the stage 6 weeks ago. This Fiona played with both technical mastery and emotional vulnerability, each note carrying the weight of her journey. As she transitioned into the fourth movement, the one they had struggled with most, the one that was now more hers than Julian's, a hush fell over the audience. This was the unveiling of something new, something that bridged past and present. Fiona's hands moved across the keys with certainty, her body swaying slightly with the music. The final movement began with echoes of themes from earlier parts of the symphony, fragments of Julian's original composition woven into a new tapestry. Then it evolved, introducing motifs that were entirely Fiona's creation, yet they complemented the existing framework so naturally that the seam between his work and hers was nearly invisible. As she approached the finale, Fiona closed her eyes, no longer needing the sheet music. The last pages of the score were in her heart now, not on paper. Her fingers found the keys unerringly as the piece built toward its climax. The final chord sequence resolved in a way that was both unexpected and inevitable, like the answer to a question you didn't know you were asking. As the last notes faded into silence, Fiona remained motionless, hands hovering above the keys, caught in the moment between what was and what would be. Then the applause began, hesitant at first, then building into a thunderous ovation as the audience rose to their feet. Critics who had come expecting a curiosity, a posthumous fragment from a promising composer cut down too soon, found themselves witnessing something far more profound. The rebirth of two artists through a single piece of music. Fiona stood, her eyes glistening with tears as she acknowledged the applause, but these were different tears than those she had shed on that failed night at the hotel. These were tears of release, of accomplishment, of joy. As she took her third bow, her hand went instinctively to Julian's watch. But instead of clutching it like a talisman against pain, she simply touched it gently, like a fond hello to an old friend. The reception following the performance was held in the concert hall's elegant atrium. Critics and patrons crowded around Fiona, offering congratulations and asking questions about the composition process. Harrison stood back, watching with a mixture of pride and a strange melancholy he couldn't quite place. "You must be Harrison Brooks," a distinguished older gentleman said, approaching him with hand extended. "I'm Theodore Winters, director of the Boston Conservatory." Harrison shook his hand. "A pleasure to meet you. I understand you've offered Fiona a position." "Indeed," Winters nodded. "Though after tonight's performance, I suspect we'll need to adjust the terms. We had envisioned her primarily as an instructor, but clearly her talents as both performer and composer deserve a larger platform. She'll be an asset to your institution," Harrison said diplomatically. Winters studied him with shrewd eyes. "Fiona tells me you were instrumental in helping her complete the symphony. I just provided an outside perspective. The musicality was all hers." Winters sipped his champagne thoughtfully. "Well, if you ever find yourself in Boston, I hope you'll visit the conservatory. We're always looking for producers with an ear for authentic talent." As Winters moved away, Fiona finally extracted herself from her admirers and made her way to Harrison's side. "There you are," she said, her face flushed with excitement. "What did you think?" "It was perfect," Harrison said honestly. "You found exactly the right balance, honoring Julian while making it your own." Fiona smiled, the expression now coming naturally to her face in a way it hadn't when they first met. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have," Harrison corrected gently. "Maybe not in the same way or on the same timeline, but you would have found your way back to music eventually. Your talent is too strong to stay buried forever." "Perhaps," she conceded, "but I'm grateful I didn't have to do it alone." She paused, suddenly remembering. "Oh, I never opened your gift." She reached into the small evening bag she carried and withdrew the box Harrison had given her before the performance. Opening it carefully, she revealed a simple silver charm in the shape of a small piano. "I thought it might join the watch on your necklace," Harrison explained. "The past and the present together." Fiona's fingers touched the charm gently. "It's perfect," she whispered. She unclasped her necklace, slid the charm onto the chain alongside Julian's watch, and fastened it again around her neck. "Thank you." They stood in companionable silence, watching the celebration unfold around them. "I spoke with Director Winters," Harrison said finally. "The Boston position sounds like a wonderful opportunity." "It is," Fiona agreed. "I'll be teaching advanced piano performance, but they're also interested in having me develop a composition program." She hesitated. "I leave in 2 weeks." Harrison nodded, ignoring the tightness in his chest. "When do you finish at the Rosemont?" "Tomorrow is my last night," she said. "They're hosting a small farewell reception in the lounge." "I'll be there," Harrison promised. Later that night, walking back to his hotel room, Harrison found himself replaying the evening in his mind. Fiona's triumphant performance, the way the music had flowed through her with both technical brilliance and emotional depth, the genuine smile that now lit her face, all of it filled him with a satisfaction that went beyond professional pride. In helping her find her way back to music, he had been witness to something rare and beautiful, the healing of an artist's soul. That was enough, he told himself. It had to be. The Rosemont Lounge was crowded for Fiona's final performance. Hotel staff and regular guests mingled with local music enthusiasts who had read the glowing reviews of her symphony performance. Harrison arrived early, claiming his usual seat near the piano. When Fiona entered, she was wearing a blue dress instead of her customary black, Julian's watch and Harrison's charm both visible on the chain around her neck. She acknowledged the warm applause with a smile, then took her seat at the piano. "For my final evening at the Rosemont," she announced, "I'd like to play something new, a piece I composed this week." Harrison sat up straighter, surprised. They had spent considerable time together finishing Julian's symphony, but she hadn't mentioned writing something of her own. The piece began softly, with a questioning melody that reminded Harrison vaguely of their first real conversation. As it developed, he recognized subtle references to motifs from temporal resonance, but transformed into something entirely new, something that spoke not of grief and loss, but of renewal and possibility. When she finished, the lounge erupted in applause. Fiona acknowledged it with a graceful nod, then continued with a selection of classical pieces that had been favorites during her time at the hotel. Throughout her performance, Harrison noticed how naturally she now moved with the music, how the rigid separation between pianist and piano had dissolved into a harmonious partnership. After her final piece, as guests and staff offered their farewells, Fiona made her way to Harrison's table. "That new composition was beautiful," he said as she sat down. "What's it called?" "Beginning Again," she replied, a hint of shyness in her smile. "It's still a work in progress." "Like its composer," Harrison observed. "Yes, I suppose so." Fiona's fingers traced the rim of her water glass. "Harrison, there's something I haven't told you about Boston." Harrison braced himself. "Oh? I've declined the full-time position," she said. "I've accepted a visiting professorship instead, just for one semester." Harrison blinked, confused. "Why? It seemed perfect for you." "It's a wonderful opportunity," Fiona agreed. "But I realized something after completing Julian's symphony. I'm not ready to settle into academic life just yet." She took a deep breath. "I've been offered a limited tour, 6 cities performing temporal resonance along with some of my own compositions." "Fiona, that's fantastic," Harrison said sincerely. "You deserve that platform." "The thing is," she continued, her eyes meeting his directly, "the tour ends in New York, where your studio is based." "How did you know I'm based in New York?" Harrison asked, surprised. Fiona smiled. "I did some research, and I had an idea I wanted to discuss with you. Professionally, I mean." "I'm listening." "I'd like to record temporal resonance," she said, "along with a collection of my new compositions, and I'd like you to produce it." She hesitated. "That is, if you'd be interested in such a project." Harrison felt a smile spreading across his face. "I think that could be arranged." "Good," Fiona said, her own smile widening. "Because I've already spoken with your company, and they're quite enthusiastic about the concept." Harrison laughed. "You've been busy." "I've had 5 years of standing still," she replied. "I have a lot of catching up to do." As the evening wound down, they walked together through the hotel's grand lobby. "Will you be at the airport tomorrow?" Fiona asked casually. "I wouldn't miss it," Harrison promised, "though saying goodbye isn't my favorite activity." Fiona stopped walking, turning to face him. "It's not goodbye, Harrison. It's just intermission." She touched the piano charm on her necklace. "The past will always be part of me, but I'm ready for the next movement." In that moment, looking at her surrounded by the soft glow of the hotel chandeliers, Harrison recognized something he had suspected for weeks. That in helping Fiona find her way back to music, he had found something unexpected himself. Not just a talented pianist to produce, not just a friend who understood loss, but someone who reminded him why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. "Well then," he said softly, "I look forward to our next collaboration, Ms. Wright." "As do I, Mr. Brooks," she replied, her eyes bright with promise. "I have a feeling it's going to be our finest work yet." Outside, the city hummed with its own rhythms, a backdrop to their unfolding story. And somewhere, perhaps, Julian's spirit smiled as the music continued, changed, evolved, but alive in ways neither of them could have imagined when a stranger first asked a silent pianist why she never smiled.